Hilaire, Governor of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Dorian Noel, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, to our esteemed panel, our moderator, Dr. Shelton Nichols, Dr. Eric Parado Herrera, Chief Economist and General Manager, Research Department, Inter-American Development Bank, Mrs. Therese Turner-Jones, Vice President, Operations, Caribbean Development Bank, Dr. Petra Jakubic, Financial Stability Advisor, IMF CARTAC, Mr. Bernardo Requena, Director Representative, Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, representatives of regional and international organizations, representatives of regional central banks and the corporate sector, management and staff of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen joining us in person and via live stream, good morning. Thank you for accepting our invitation and joining us this morning for the panel discussion entitled Building Trinidad and Tobago's Economic and Financial Resilience, the Role of Multilateral Financial Institutions. My name is Kevin Finch. I'm the manager of the research department here at the Central Bank, and I will be guiding you through this morning's proceedings. So to begin, I now invite Governor Hilaire on stage to formally welcome you. Governor.
Yes, thanks very much, Kevin. Welcome one and all to your Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago is a small country in a big world. There's a lot happening throughout, and we need to be in touch with what is going on. Not only that, the world has already organized itself into different blocks, into different arrangements, and we are part of it, and we are proud to be part of it. Today, we have the privilege of having our guest speakers or comrades from different organizations that will chat with you on Trinidad and Tobago's relationships with these international financial organizations. I want to commend our research department for this initiative. It was solely their baby, and I'm happy to be part of it also. So thanks for inviting me. Today we welcome our colleagues. We have Peter, we have Bernardo, we have Eric, and of course we have Therese, and my former boss when I was in the research department, our former Deputy Governor, Shelton Nichols. We are really happy to have you here, Shelton, to moderate. So without further ado, I want to welcome you here, and I think we'll have a fascinating presentation. Look out a little later this week, because in our public education notes, which are just 2 pages of where we try to explain things in a simple form to the public, we will be explaining how Trinidad and Tobago interacts with international financial institutions. So look out for that. Look out for a thrilling session, and welcome.
Thank you very much, Governor. Now, before we switch gears to the panel discussion, allow me to provide some brief context for this morning's session. So a panel discussion, as Governor said, is usually the showpiece event of our annual research review seminar. This year, the discussion takes on added significance as it takes place within the context of the bank's celebration of 60 years of existence, and I think that is worthy of a round of applause. We are pleased that we were able to assemble such a high-level panel. This amalgam of persons reflects one of the cornerstone principles of the bank's operations, and that is collaboration. Established in 1964, the Central Bank has played a pivotal role in Trinidad and Tobago's economic and financial development over its 60-year history. Through its implementation of monetary policy, regulation and supervision of financial institutions, and support for now well-established local financial entities, including the Stock Exchange and the Trinidad and Tobago Securities and Exchange Commission, the Central Bank has significantly influenced the nation's financial landscape. Since achieving independence in 1962, Trinidad and Tobago has prioritized economic and social development through the implementation of strategic economic policies, investment in infrastructure, and the promotion of sustainable growth. The Central Bank has been at the vanguard of these efforts through ensuring monetary and financial stability, fostering a resilient banking, and supporting economic initiatives that improve the quality of life for all citizens. The bank's current 5-year strategic plan, which runs from 2021 to 2026, cements our footprint in traditional spheres of intervention, such as strengthening technical research, fortifying data and economic intelligence, and promoting domestic capital market development. However, there are many internal and external factors which compel us to adopt an even more forward-looking approach. For example, attention has also pivoted to formalizing a financial crisis management framework, advancing digitalization efforts in Trinidad and Tobago through supporting fintech solutions, safe environment, modernizing the domestic payment system, and integrating environmental issues and climate change into our policy considerations. We have further distilled these strategic objectives into 4 immediate priorities, namely 1, cybersecurity, 2, fintech, 3, payment system, and 4, pension reform. Now, how do we intend to achieve this expansive and I dare say very ambitious agenda? As a small island developing state, Trinidad and Tobago cannot do it alone. Neither can we be perceived as picking sides. And this is against the backdrop of an increasingly multipolar world and heightened geoeconomic fragmentation. The central bank stands firmly on the side of multilateralism as a vehicle to shared prosperity and inclusive growth. We can only achieve this through meaningful collaboration with our international partners. Again, this is firmly reflected in our strategic plan with a number of projects geared at bolstering our interface with international institutions. Over the years, the multilateral financial institutions, for example, the IMF, the IDB, the World Bank, CDB, and more recently CAF, have played a central role in helping the central bank drive much needed reforms to support the economic and social transformation of Trinidad and Tobago and to place the country on a higher and more sustainable development trajectory. Much of this help has come in the form of technical assistance and capacity building, policy development and implementation, standard setting and regulation, international cooperation, crisis management and prevention, and direct and indirect financial support. So we look forward to the continued engagement and support of these institutions as we seek to achieve our development objectives. During this morning's discussion, we have an opportunity to hear more definitively from the institutions represented on the panel, how they can partner with the central bank and other domestic agencies to avoid common pitfalls and other challenges that oftentimes litter the path to development. To guide discussions this morning, we have the eminently qualified Dr. Shelton Nichols. Dr. Nichols is no stranger to us here at the bank, having served as Deputy Governor for 10 years. He's a distinguished economist with extensive experience in the international finance and development space. He has served as a senior advisor to the President of the Caribbean Development Bank and held key positions at the International Monetary Fund, where he led the Financial Sector Stability Review. Dr. Nichols also pioneered financial stability initiatives at the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center, CARTAC. His career includes roles as Executive Director of the Caribbean Center for Monetary Studies and as Chairman of the Caribbean Development Fund. So I now hand you over to Dr. Nichols and to our panel. Dr. Nichols.
Thank you, Kevin. And normally Kevin says a lot more than I would like him to say. Thanks for the introduction. And good morning, everyone, including those joining us in person and online for this panel discussion organized by the Central Bank on building Trinidad and Tobago economic and financial resilience, the role of multilateral financial institutions. We have assembled a very highly qualified, experienced, and expert panel of speakers to reflect and share their views on the current and emerging relations with Trinidad and Tobago and on how they can best support the Central Bank to achieve its monetary and financial objectives in congruence with the broader development goals enunciated in our country's development vision. And so just to give you a little introduction of the speakers, our first panelist is on my extreme left, is Stern Jones, the Vice President of Operations at the Caribbean Bank. Terrace has over 30 years of experience in macroeconomic economic development, brings specialized expertise on the Caribbean and Latin America. Terrace has also held senior positions at the IMF, including Deputy Division Chief Coordinator of CARTAC. She was one of CARTAC's coordinators, as well as at the Inter-American Development Bank. She's a member of the International Women's Forum and a passionate advocate for development issues, right? Particularly those related to climate change and small island economies. Terrace. The second panelist is no stranger to Trinidad and Tobago and is Bernardo Requena from the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. We commonly call this bank CAF, where he serves as, of course, CAF's director, representative in Trinidad and Tobago. Previously, he was the permanent secretary of public investment and external financing in the Ministry of Finance and Bolivia, highly experienced. He was a member of the Committee of Experts for the second edition of the Recognition of Good Practices, the State Sustainable Development 2020, and has served as alternate governor for Bolivia, both the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. He was also a member of the board of the Financial Fund for the Development of La Plata Basin. Our third panelist is Dr. Petr Jakubic. I think Petr prefers us to call him Peter. If I'm sure about that, it may be easier. Petr is the financial stability advisor at CARTAC, a very, very important post, which is, of course, as you know, CARTAC is the main instrument of the International Monetary Fund. Petr is a Czech national. He brings over 20 years of experience in the financial sector. He has served as an economist at the European Central Bank, a technical advisor at the Bank of Settlements, and a financial stability consultant to the central banks of Austria and Malta. Additionally, he has held the position of chief economist at the Czech National Bank and led the financial team at the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions. They have played a vital role in helping the central bank itself here set up financial stability many years ago. Our fourth panelist is, of course, Dr. Eric Delgado. It's really great to have you here. Eric is the chief economist and general manager of the Inter-American Development Bank, Chilean national, and he served as the superintendent of banks and financial institutions in Chile, where he played a leading role in modernizing banking legislation and introducing new financial instruments. He has also advised numerous central banks on managing inflation-targeted regimes and implementing sovereign wealth funds. Eric co-chaired the World Economic Council on Economics and Equitable Transition, and has held academic positions as professor of economics and finance at the AC Business School at the Universidad de Los Andes, Santiago, Chile, and was also visiting professor at the Universities of Oxford and at Zurich, ETH. He was recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. Very fortunate to have this very esteemed panel. So just a little bit of a background before I start getting into this discussion. We've had a long history for that. We've set in clear developmental goals, the 1960s, 70s, and the 80s. These plans, of course, these development plans focused on building an independent nation capable of driving economic growth, reducing inequality and poverty, and of course, improving sustainable employment by leveraging our abundant hydrocarbon resources. Today, in the post-pandemic era, many developing countries are struggling to rebuild their productive capacities in goods and services. Income inequalities have widened. We've noticed this in the Caribbean. Poverty and unemployment remain high, and of course, food security is increasingly threatened by climate change and logistical issues. Ukraine, Russia, and Israeli-Palestine conflicts has disrupted global trade to some extent, driven up some commodity prices. They have heightened inflation in some places, and they perhaps can endanger the fragile global recovery that we are seeing sort of taking place. And these underlying challenges themselves have slowed the progress of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals or SDGs by, of course, 2030. We're very close there, and we still lack to some extent. Now, Trinidad and Tobago is tackling various economic, social, and environmental challenges that impede its development goals, including, of course, a shrinking and undiversified economy, still struggling with this question, rising social disparities, and, of course, vulnerability to climate change and disasters. To address these, the government has introduced Vision 2030, focusing on people-centered development, good governance, a competitive economy, environmental sustainability, and of course, modernizing infrastructure. And in support of the strategy, the central bank, as discussed by Kevin, developed a plan to modernize its financial sector policies to ensure that congruence with these development goals. So in today's discussion, we want to explore several important topics with our panelists. What are the kinds of strategies we are seeing in these institutions for engagement and collaboration with Trinidad and Tobago? what are some of the key development support projects aimed at enhancing economic and financial resilience, and of course, the available mechanisms and instruments for financing development. And of course, we will keep the discussion fluid. My job is to try to keep that, within a certain time frame. So our rules of engagement are simple. We will ask the panelists a series of questions in 3 rounds on some of these themes and allow them to share their insights with us. And after that, we will open the floor questions from the online and the announcement. So I'll begin round 1 and start. I think Therese already has a mic, so I think I will start with Therese. And Therese, Trinidad and Tobago is the largest shareholder in CDB. However, some observers have noted in CDB's presence within Trinidad and Tobago's development space over the past decade. Can you tell us something about the plans for ramping up support to Trinidad and Tobago moving forward, and what country strategy? What's happening?
Thanks a lot, Charles. Before I go into that, responding to your question, just let me just say congratulations to the Central Bank on 60 years. This is no small accomplishment. I also feel like I'm coming home here because in 2003 I led the Article 4 consultation for the IMF, and so I feel like I know a lot of the players here. And Alvin is a close friend, has been. We crossed paths many times in our careers, and of course you. This is a really excellent question, and particularly starting from the point of view that the bank started 54 years ago. One of the founding fathers was a Trinidadian, was another luminaries at the time. But in terms of engagement with Trinidad and Tobago, as Vice President of Operations, I'd like to think that Trinidad would be one of our bigger clients, and possibly because Trinidad is one of the higher country members of the bank. Trinidad hasn't really taken advantage of some of the products that the bank has to offer. In fact, between 1970 and 2016, Trinidad only availed itself of about $200 million from the bank, and that was roughly about 3% of the lending of the bank. So that's a paltry sum given the size of Trinidad's economy, but also given the size of some of Trinidad's challenges. And the capital that Trinidad holds in the bank is just under 18%, as Sultan mentioned, one of the biggest shareholders. So, and given Trinidad's credit rating, it would be great to have more engagement with Trinidad as well. Why is that? And what has happened with successive country engagement strategies over the years? We've been trying to parse that question a lot. I think it has to do with engagement. It also has to do with changes in administration in Trinidad and Tobago, where a country strategy typically is a 5-year strategy that is aligned with all of the interests of the government. We heard what Kevin mentioned, you've mentioned some of the Sultan too, in terms of where Trinidad sees itself and the decarbonization of its economy, trying to diversify. And so we've put emphasis on that particular aspect, as well as looking at agriculture, disaster risk management, education, and creative economy. So those are some of the key pillars in the most recent strategy. That strategy ended in 2021. So we're in the process of, we're now in 2024. It's taken 3 years to get the new strategy going. But as we look ahead, I think there's a lot of room for focusing on diversifying Trinidad's economy, embedding digital transformation across the economy, and working on technical assistance areas, including areas like not just in the creative economy, where we've done a lot of work, but also in agriculture, access to finance, small entrepreneurs. Those are 3 big technical assistance programs we have currently underway, and I think are going to drive the conversation for the next strategy. But we'd like to be doing more in Trinidad. Not just because Trinidad is a big client and a big shareholder of the bank, but because of Trinidad's position in the region, and we are the regional bank, we want to see more engagement in Trinidad. And it's a 2-way street. It's also learning what what are some lessons that Trinidad can share with other members of the CDB community? We know that Guyana is on a big oil boom at the moment. A lot of the technical assistance advice and so on coming from Trinidad investors. I think there are ways to look at this equation that would benefit Trinidad, but also benefit the rest of the region. So that engagement needs to be.
Thank you, Pervez. So, you know, we look at this discussion. I want to perhaps pose the next question to Bernardo. And Bernardo, over the past few years, has definitely increased its project and national footprint in Trinidad and Tobago. Say to us about the developmental areas that you're involved in and the areas and some of your planning.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good day to everyone. Thank you for the invitation, Governor. And thank you for putting a photo of me that I was when I was finished university, because I looked very, very tired. Before going to your question, let's try to put in perspective where is Trinidad and Tobago. The Human Development Index of Trinidad and Tobago is 81. It means that we are in the place 57 out of 100 countries. But there is a lot of improvement. That's where we are. In the case of CAF, our work plan has 3 pillars. It's impossible to have a work plan without considering the plans of the country, the plans of the government. And you mentioned the Vision 2030. Of course, we consider the Vision 2030 as one of the roots of our work here. The other one is the institutional plan, 22-26. And I'm not going to, all the details of the plan. It was presented to the board of directors in 2021. And the same board of directors, they gave us a capital of $7 billion, and that will have to increase our portfolio to 60 billion. Not everybody, not everything for Trinidad and Tobago, of course, but it's for all the countries in the region. So that's good news. So in the case of our institutional plan, we have mission-driven initiatives, and they go from energy transition to. We also have cross-cutting activities. Cross-cutting is, it's what are we doing with all our loans and technical assistance. So green interaction, we want to be the green bank of the region, and of course, no institutional strength, inclusion, gender. I'm going to talk a little bit about gender. Alliance, very important, because we are here as part of what is needed, not only for but the region. And the agendas, enabling agendas. So it's what we do every day: financial stability, digital transformation, transparency, innovative financial instruments. So that's very important for us. And of course, last but not least, our country program. The country program, it started in 2021 to 2025. It goes along with the government program. It's the same in every country. By the way, we have a lot of work on this next year because we are going to prepare. We have 4 pillars. The first one, of course, is fiscal sustainable state modernization. It's impossible, to work without. We're in the central bank here. That is the base of any growth for the country. Economic and social infrastructure. That's the DNA of CAP. We've been working for years on infrastructure, either social or economic, and productivity. Productive transformation is paramount. Are you looking at the slides? Okay, good. And of course, it's impossible to have a program without education. public education modernization is very important. I don't want to go into the details, but that's part of our work plan. Now we are working alone with the Ministry of Education. And cross-cutting, we have digitalization, of course, in climate change. Very important. And the other one is gender. And let me show you one graph that we are there. It's really not easy to understand. But what we have there is the female labor force participation, the horizontal. And on the vertical, you have the difference between what we expect for women to participate in schooling years and what we have. So what you see there is that in rural areas, women tend to go less than expected, but they participate in those areas less in the labor market. So there is a relationship, of course. There are other considerations, but there is a very strong relationship between years of schooling and participation in the labor for women. Fortunately, there are we have that's the information that we have. We are looking for new information. So the other consideration, can you go to the next one, please? Is productivity. Listen, productivity is at the base of the growth of a country. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, it's comparing with the US, for example, 60% of productivity of US. You decompose the growth between labor, capital, and technology. What is called technology, the total factor productivity. You see that it was negative in the last years. And that's a huge issue. For example, of the 9 most important sectors for the economy, 7 had a very low productivity. 2 had a higher productivity, which are energy and trade. But the rest, a very low productivity. So we want to work. There are many things to do, of course, but we want to focus on those four areas. I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem later. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And these are sobering statistics to get, particularly. I'd like to emphasize on the question. I'm sure we'll back to maybe having a little bit more discussion on that. Let me turn to, I'll call him Peter rather than Petre, is maybe easy, Peter. CARTAC has been a very trusted advisor and strategic partner with the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and of course with the central bank for many years and on many initiatives. Tell us a little bit about the key areas of your phase 6. I imagine you're moving to a new program. So what are some of these key areas in that phase, and how do they relate to the kinds of development goals we're seeing in Trinidad and Tobago? And importantly, I used to be there many moons ago. I'm quite aware of some of the obstacles. Have we gotten past these obstacles? Are there still obstacles you're seeing to actually delivery of the support in the Caribbean and in Trinidad and Tobago?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
First, let me thanks for the invitation to the governor, to the central bank. So it's nice to be here and to be able to talk here. CARTAC indeed is basically a strategic partner for the central bank and for all central banks in the region. Myself, I actually joined CARTAC a little bit more than 2 years ago. So I have already I had some interaction with different countries here in the region. So I've also tried to kind of put it into perspective, like where the whole region stands and what is the position of Trinidad and Tobago. CARTAC is working with 23 countries, right? So it's not easy job in the way to satisfy the needs of all countries, which are in some aspect very similar, in some aspect they are quite different because the size of the country is different, the human capacity is different, the issue are sometimes different, but there are a lot of similarities as well. And CARTAC now, as it was mentioned, is moving to the new phase program with basically new budget and new targets. We kind of continue with the traditional area of support. So I'm responsible for financial stability. That's basically the area I would like to talk about. But we also look at other areas like supervision, costume debt management, macroeconomic programming, economic and financial statistics, anti-money laundering. So there are many other areas where CARTAC is trying to help. CARTAC is trying to help with human capacity, with institutional capacity to basically implement sound macroeconomic and financial policies that ultimately will promote growth and reduce poverty. So that's kind of ultimate target. And we are kind of trying to cover in terms now moving back to financial stability. We are trying to cover all those traditional risks which we know for many, many years. So to help central banks to correctly identify them and to have a capacity and tools to be able to identify them timely, to be able to address them and mitigate later on. But apart from this, what is kind of a little bit more new recently is that we are also trying to focus on those new emerging risks, which are relatively new. So especially I'm talking about climate risk here, but also cyber risk and fintech, basically all this what was mentioned before. But especially climate risk, we focus on this a lot, and we are trying to help, the countries, including Trinidad, in longer time with being able to tackle those risks, to being able to assess, because this needs to be included in a risk assessment framework. And now moving to the challenges, I would say, in the region, I would see like 3 common areas where I see the most of those challenges. So first is data availability and data management. The second is staff capacity and resources. And the last one is communication. So if I start with availability, data availability here, you are in a very good position because compared to other countries or central banks in the region, you have data warehouse, you have quite developed data system. But maybe where the gaps are is to use the data which you have in-house a little bit more extensively, and having tools being able to use this data without like high cost, meaning that certain information need to be accessible to the team in the way that they spend most of the time on the analysis and not most of the time gathering the data. That's common problem for the region. So if I see financial stability departments, teams in different countries, and not only financial stability teams, but also the others, but let's say financial stability, it needs this complex data, very granular data. So not only macroeconomic data, but very granular banking data, financial institutional data on monthly basis, quarterly basis, balance sheet data. So basically, sometimes the experts spend 95% on gathering data and 5% on the analytical work. It's not efficient, right? So this is something what we need to change. So we need to work with the data more efficiently, and we need to fully use the potential of the data. You're in better position than other countries because in many others, they don't have sometimes almost any data. And they don't have data warehouse, and it's extremely difficult. Here it's better, but still some more work needs to be done. Another one is staff capacity and resources. The problem in the Caribbean is sometimes the countries are very small. The number of people who are specialized in certain areas is very limited. So if you want to get people with certain skills, it's almost mission impossible. Here, again, you are a little bit better off compared to your peers, but this problem is there as well. Yeah? So if you really look at some very specific areas, you know, people with actuarial background, for instance, it's very difficult to find them in the country. And the last one is to use extensive or more extensively the communication. So sometimes, you know, especially in financial stability, the communication is very limited. Yeah? So here, again, I would say you are better compared to your peers. But again, there are some gaps and more work needs to be done. Communication, especially on financial sector policy, is very complex and demanding. So it needs to be tackled with, you know, with certain way. And also you need to kind of distinguish different target groups, how to communicate to different audience. So, you know, to focus on all groups, which sometimes it's not done. So apart from general public, you know, to work more with financial industry, to have more regular seminar with them, that they really fully understand what you are doing, you know, what the risks which you identify, how they should tackle them, to cooperate more between financial stability and supervision. So those are the issues which need to be tackled. And I would stop here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pet. And, you know, it's good to hear on one stream the fact that the data systems are good, but I mean, the point you make as well is, you know, it's good, but you need to see much more analysis and taking advantage of that data for policy analysis, you know? So that's a strong point, and of course, working with industry. So thanks for that. And I mean, some of the issues still remain the same from my time, but clearly they have, you know, I can see some you know, clear improvements in many instances. Let me turn, you know, to the fourth person, not the least, but of course the maybe one of the most critical in terms of Trinidad and Tobago, you know, Eric Parado. And Eric, we've also had a long relationship with the IDB in terms of our development support. Tell us what is happening today in some of the key areas of focus for you know, for the IDB and in particular for Trinidad and Tobago, and some of the kinds of areas of support you're thinking about for the Caribbean region, and in particular Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much, Shelton, and good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be in Trinidad and Tobago. This is the first time here, and so far so good. So thank you very much for the experience. It's also an honor to be part of this panel. So thank you very much for the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago for the invitation. And I'm really glad to see also good old friends. So that's very, very nice. I sent a very long presentation to Shelton yesterday. No, you know, a couple of days ago, and he said, too long. We need to have a conversation. We need to have a panel discussion. And somebody said to me once, if you cannot make a presentation with a PowerPoint, it means that you don't have power, nor point. So now I will try to do my best to talk without a PowerPoint presentation, just a couple of slides. But I would say Trinidad and Tobago have similar challenges to Latin America and the Caribbean countries. For instance, declining productivity, failing competitiveness, low innovation, and this is very common in all Latin American countries, and this is happening in the last 20 years. Bernardo mentioned productivity, and I'm going to show you probably a couple of slides later. I'm going to show you some estimation regarding productivity, and productivity, as he said, is very low or even negative in some countries. And I brought some estimation for the specific case of Trinidad and Tobago. Of course, it's very simple. So this is just a first approach, because we were discussing with Shelton that we need to think more about how to measure productivity in different sectors. and in different aggregates, but I think one of the issues, I would say, is the lack of productivity. If you make a comparison with other regions, for instance, Asian countries, where you have and where you get the difference in terms of economic growth and productivity is not in capital, sometimes, it's not labor, but it's in technology, the total factor productivity. So I think this is a must. And having said that, the new IDB strategy have three main objectives, like the pillars. One is related to growth and productivity, so very important for us, because if we want to share wealth, we need to create wealth. Second, poverty and social issue, still a very important issue for Latin American and the Caribbean countries. And third, climate change. Of course, the other topics are in some way cross sectors, and we also care about health, education, gender, and we can talk about that. So one issue in the specific case of Trinidad and Tobago is the digital transformation. And I think that's very important because we have a lot of challenges in our countries, I mentioned before, but I think governments are not responding or are responding slowly. And sometimes not because governments don't want to do things, but because the political discussion is very, very hard. And that's why we have to think how to save the economy, but at the same time how to save the democracy, because we need to find some sort of national consensus to think long term. But in that regard, I think the government response in Trinidad and Tobago is thinking like that. They have a plan, they are thinking long term, and the focus right now is on digital transformation, which is very good news for productivity. And that's why it's important to say the establishment of the Ministry of Digital Transformation in 2021. And at the same time, the IDB is supporting those efforts. And here, an example of this support is the 90 million conditional credit line for investment projects CLIP in Trinidad and Tobago. So very important, the benchmark. Trinidad and Tobago has been an early adopter of the digital development agenda in the Caribbean. So right now outperforms LAC region in the digital adoption across businesses, people, and government, but rank still 92 out of 131 economies in Network Readiness Index. So there is a lot of space to improve. The main challenges: limited state capacity to regulate and implement digital transformation, and the low participation of citizens and firms in the digital economy. So we are working in three areas. One is digital financial services and business environment. Second, digital skills and education. And third, digitalization of public services. I think those three are very important in terms of Trinidad and Tobago efforts, but also the IDB program to support all these efforts by the government. So just to finish, because I'm too long right now, is digitalization is key for all countries, but especially for Trinidad and Tobago economic transformation and resilience. And the expected results are to increase public service capacity, very important, reduce transaction cost, enhance digital protection for citizens, and increase usage of integrated digital services. And the central bank's role, of course, is crucial in shaping the digital financial landscape. Thank you, Sheldon.
Yeah. Excellent. So, I mean, there are some common themes, obviously, from this first prong we've been hearing about. We've been hearing about productivity. We've been hearing about digital transformation. We've been hearing about climate change. And we obviously have, you know, a number of challenges still. I mean, the message is that we're doing much better, but when we compare ourselves to, you know, the global peers, we still have, you know, some road to travel, right? I want to drill down a little further maybe starting with Therese, you know, and I want to get a little bit down to some specific projects. I know, Therese, you've identified your key pillars in the strategy for Trinidad and Tobago. One is of course, being developed. But you know, tell me a little bit about some of the specific projects proposed to strengthen this economic and financial resilience, and in particular, dealing with this transitioning fossil fuels to renewable energy, because, you know, the transition has to take place. We can't just throw out energy, you know, now. It's part of the economy, but we have to plan that transition. And how do you see that in terms of the specific projects that you're thinking about?
I just want to do a reality check. Okay, so CDB is the smallest of everyone on the stage. So if we were to rank the resources, we would have IDB, well, IMF, IDB, CAF, CDB. CDB coming in at 3 billion assets. IDB is in the billions. IMF, well, they can do whatever they want. So I just want to put it in perspective, but I think the story for the CDB in Trinidad is not an impressive one. I'm going to say that. And I'm sitting here cringing because given what I said about the founding fathers, but also given the importance of Trinidad as a leading economy in the region, it hasn't been stellar. And we have to own that. We have to own it in terms of what that dialogue looks like with the Trinidadian government, but also, as Shelton is asking, some specific projects. In the last country strategy, for example, we identified over $430 million worth of projects. Shall I tell you how many actually materialized? Yeah, less than about 10 million. So that's a concern, because in the strategy, we had identified doing more on water and sanitation. And I see we have a former public works minister in our audience in the form of Robert LaHunt. There's a lot of room in water and sanitation, and we are doing some technical assistance around your master plan for water resources in the country. But it hasn't been outstanding in terms of what we've been able to do. Even the line of credit for SMEs, small, medium enterprises, with the AIC and the Development Finance Limited company, the uptake has been limited. Why that is, I'm not entirely sure, but we need to figure out why isn't that money not moving to where it needs to go, because we constantly hear from small, medium enterprises, especially women-owned businesses, that access to finance is a big issue. We're doing a lot of technical assistance, and here it's very important work because we have knowledge to share, like all of the other institutions that are working in this region. But it's good to see that Trinidad is interested in areas like road safety, and so big technical assistance under about $1 million to make sure that road safety measures are in place to reduce your traffic fatalities. I mentioned the master plan already. And in terms of transitioning, the technical assistance is going into looking at wind resources, an assessment of how wind can be another source of energy for Trinidad. So there is work there underway, but I would say in terms of major project finance, it's been limited. And that's the big confession, big takeaway from today, is that what else can we, CDB, be doing with Trinidad to help on some of these development needs that have been identified? And here, I think, is where the partnerships are going to be very important, because, as I mentioned, we're the small MDB with very large players like CAF, IDB, and others. Our position is to leverage what we can do because we have the relationships, although on the Trinidad story, it would look as if we don't have much of a relationship. But I think the relationships need to be deepened so that whatever it is that we can do, we can leverage to work with CAF, to work with IDB. And by the way, they are excellent partners, and we work with them already, especially the IDB. Not just because of my own experience with the IDB, but I think it's been a long-going relationship between CDB and IDB, because the Eastern Caribbean countries are not members of the IDB, and so IDB channels resources through the CDB so that we can do work in the OECS countries. But that's also to say that where we have projects that need to be scaled up, we start the project, we design the project, because, by the way, I still think CDB designs better projects than IDB. Sorry, Eric, but that's the word on the street. Not just because our engineers are have a lot of experience working across this region, but I think there are some peculiarities working in the Caribbean that we just know better. And so I think that that's been working in CDB's favor. We are the infrastructure bank for the region of choice. We're only limited by scale, and that means partnering with, whether it's IDB, CAF, EIB, Canada, Italy, you name it, are lining up to partner with us to deliver the kinds of projects we need to be doing. A lot of mention has been made already about work on the disaster risk front. And here, not just because we're in the middle of the hurricane season, we've already been hit with one major devastating hurricane already, but disaster risk management for all the countries in this region has to be a top priority, because it's always too late after the hurricane hits to say, oh, we did not have those things in place. And by the way, each country in this region should have a country work program on disaster risk management. And for some reason, and I think it's because human beings like to delay difficult things to do. We know that as human beings, but I think countries are no different. Disaster risk management does not feature on the front page of newspapers, and you can pick up yours today and see nobody's talking about disaster risk management. And it only happens in the context of the hurricane season. We have to get that right, because this region is, as everybody knows, one of the most hurricane prone and disaster prone, but also it's been exacerbated by climate change. So it has to be top of mind for all countries. So here we are actually in this moment reviewing another technical assistance program to help Trinidad with its disaster risk management. So I'm very proud of that. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Therese. And I mean, I like the fact that you brought up the issue of partnerships and working across institutions. That institutional collaboration is going to be important. There are some things the IDB will do better. There's some things the CDB will do better. Those partnerships targeted at a particular problem, I think, can really make a significant difference. Right? So thanks again. Let me go to Bernardo again. And Bernardo, every time I hear about CAF, I hear about digital connectivity, right? And I want to drill down a little bit into your kinds of projects. I know CAF is big on supporting diversification and growth. So tell us a little bit about, the kinds of things you're doing specifically in these areas, and is there more that you can do? Is there room for partnerships in these kinds of enterprises with some of the other institutions? So, tell us a little bit about the kinds of projects, specific projects you're doing in these areas.
Yeah, thanks. I totally agree with you. We have to work together. That's the only way of, there is room for everyone. So, yeah, to answer your question, I was looking at the technical assistance of CAF. Instead of going, like giving some my ideas, what we did. Mm-hmm. And actually I found a technical assistant with the central bank. Oh. A couple of years ago, it's an operation related with low value payment system. And the idea is to expand the financial inclusion of people in Trinidad and Tobago. So I saw that we saw things like regulation and operation, how to work, and actually there was a comparison between Trinidad and Tobago and other countries, and try to find like a work plan for that. And then going into detail, it was interesting to see that the aspect covered by the technical assistance were access, governance, critical infrastructure, interoperability, standards of transparency, and e-money. So the use of connectivity was paramount, was necessary, and the impact of connectivity for this project was necessary actually for the success of the project. I think we are half of the project. We need to go to the other half. The other technical assistance that I saw, it was the development of the digital payment ecosystem for government activities. And again, information for the Caribbean, not only Trinidad and Tobago, we see that only less than a third of the people, they use online systems for make payments. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they like to go to the bank and chat with people, but they don't use it. So the idea is how to not only push, but have give people all the possibilities for making payments. Taxes, we don't like to do it, but I mean it's better if we do it. It's safer, it's transparent, and I think it's a win-win. We saw legal aspects, regulatory, and management aspect for this technical assistance. It was a big one, and we are considering a second phase for the implementation of. So it's good news, I think, for everyone. So clearly, the use of digitalization to improve efficiency and enhance productivity is necessary. I mean, it's not a discussion now. It's how to do it and how to take that train faster. That's the thing. So in the case of digital transformation, we are given like a comprehensive support. I have there a slide. So we gave a 120 million swap digital transformation of the state. Was related with some policy issues. We are actually now discussing an investment loan for the construction of a data center, a tier 4 data center in Trinidad and Tobago. We gave a technical assistant for that, actually, for the feasibility studies. And we are about to sign a 3 million euro technical assistance with the European Union for various studies. One is the interoperability platform, e-identity program, which is very important for the country, and the second phase of the data center. And this is going to be huge. But the thing is that, and I like what you said about IDB, and we are working in the same thing. So really, we need to coordinate. And a very good example of coordination was this conference SEEDS that we made in May. SEEDS, small island development states. We said small island digital states 2.0. And it was really, we coordinate with the Ministry of Digital Transformation, and we really coordinate very well with UNDP and IDV, and we brought experts in the area. We discussed during 2 days, and it was really a good experience. And we have to go away from only discussions and to do things. Just a little bit of advertising. We are working besides, of course, digital transformation, digitalization. We have programs in the case of a loan for drainage and flood prevention program. This is going to change. Last time I tried to come to the central bank, I couldn't because of the water. So we have a program for that, and the idea is to start this year. Technical assistance for that program. Actually, our technical assistance are for the preparation of the loans. We have another very important for the adaptation of in South Arapush. Again, flood relief. And we have in the case of transport, we are very active in the country. We gave a 175 swap for infrastructure, and we are working on the national transportation policy, of course, with the Ministry of Works and Transportation. And we are working in many other areas besides digitalization, education. We are working on a loan as well. We are going to sign probably in a couple of weeks with Exim Bank a program for small and medium enterprises. We are working on green energy. So we have a lot of work in the country, but really we would like to work not alone, but with all the partners here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and yeah, it's good to see the increased activity. I mean, the flood is critical, so that is good to see that, some thought and some effort and some finances being devoted to that, along with the significant work on digitization. And you, of course, the flooding disasters and climate issues would perhaps lead me to Petr, because, in all the financial stability work that central banks are doing, et cetera, and all of that, we have to try to think about how do we really think about these climate-related risks and cyber risks. It's fine to do all the digital work, but then there are some risks that we have to manage, and tell us a little bit, is CARTAC active in this area? Do you all have plans for building out these climate-related risk framework, and how can Trinidad and Tobago actually, benefit from that? Yeah?
So, as I mentioned in the beginning, climate risk is one of the priorities. So basically, we want to support green transition with the countries, and actually, it's a relatively new area, especially in financial stability. So it kind of has started relatively recently in the Caribbean region. This type of work where we are supporting the authorities. And we had recently, it was February this year, we had a first in-person climate workshop in the region where all 23 countries in the region were present. And I think that's also what shows how important it is to cooperate. But not only with those institutions was mentioned, so there are different kind of international partners helping with this green transition, but we have to keep in mind it's also important to cooperate among those countries in the region, right? Because the human capacity is limited, so we need to pool the resources to get together in this aspect. And of course, IMF and CARTAC is trying to help with this, to facilitate also the discussion within the region. Though another thing is that climate risk is interdisciplinary topic. So we are mostly here central bankers, we are economists, financial experts. We don't have strong backgrounds on, climatologist science, or this is not traditional area. And we need to leverage also on this knowledge which is out of our traditional field. And that's what also came out in this workshop we had recently, where we try to put there, also involve also people from the region who are able to help central banks, also central banks of Trinidad, to prepare climate scenarios and to develop this. Now, in terms of what is needed, like which and how IMF can help, so there needs to be preconditions to do the climate risk assessment. So in terms of financial stability, we are trying to help the countries to make climate risk assessments. But for that, you need to have data. You need to have stress testing methodology, because one thing is to have data, to have a climate projection, another is how to project this on financial sector. And for this, you need kind of to have in place stress testing modeling framework, and you need also to have banks' granular data. So in this respect, CARTAC is trying to facilitate this. We also including this discussion, like what are the preconditions, what you need to do as a homework before we can implement the risk assessment framework in all technical assistance which we do in the region. And we try to basically facilitate all this discussion. So basically, if I go to my other slide, you can see like the complexity there in this picture, where you see that it starts with kind of climate scenario, and then you need to think about both physical transition risk. And this is something like climate risk is something very real. Kevin was in the workshop in February, and there were some colleagues who presented really kind of clear examples how visible climate risk is in those countries. I remember the presentation from Cayman Islands showing the beach, which was there 10 years ago and is not there anymore. So, this is kind of reality. So this is not just academic exercise. And here on this picture, you see the steps which need to be done. And the last step is actually to project those climate scenarios on financial sector balance sheets. And for this, you can use either more macro approach, if you are lacking more granular data, or if you have more granular data, which is of course better, then you can go for a more micro approach where you kind of really look loan by loan and how this loan might be affected because the collateral is in some kind of area which might be flooded and stuff like this. So I would stop here for the economy of time, but we can talk more about this later.
Very interested, and I myself personally am keen to see the central bank pick up this area. Maybe we need to have inside research a couple of climatologists as well, not only economists too, because this is going to be a major issue for the balance sheets of financial institutions on the road. So, so maybe, I know the governor is here and others, but maybe it's time to add a climatologist to the bank's arsenal to really begin to push this forward. So thanks for that. Right? Eric, I want to come back to this digital transformation thing, that you all are looking at, and AI, with my sons talk about ChatGPT, they have AI stuff, all kinds of things that they're trying to teach me. And it's become an important focus in some development plans in, around the world. And I, how do we get that kind of thing into the development plans for Trinidad and Tobago? What are the kinds of implications you see? What kind of recommendations? How do we begin to leverage AI, in our development work?
Thank you, Shelton, for that question. But before answering that, I join my colleagues to say collaboration is quite important, given the challenges that we have. They are significant, so we cannot do this alone, so we have to join forces. And second, multilaterals not only lend money, but also provide technical assistance and provide knowledge. And I think our effort right now is to have a knowledge bank at the Inter-American Development Bank. And we're trying to provide answers for policy questions and try to help governments and states and citizens how to drive in these turmoil times. So having said that, I'm agreeing your question. We are trying to understand what's going on in terms of AI and trying to give some estimation regarding the impact on our labor markets and our economy. So we recently released, this was a couple of days ago, a new paper. And it's a very novel paper because we ask AI about occupational exposure to AI. So that's why the name of the paper is Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, which jobs will AI replace after all? So we ask AI, okay, we have all the occupations, and every occupation is composed by a vector of tasks. So you know how to speak, you know how to use computers, you know how to make a telephone call, and you know a lot of tasks. So each of you have a profession, is composed by several tasks. And we ask AI, what is the likelihood to be replaced every task? So we come up with a measure of occupational exposure. So in average, the occupational exposure for the first year, within a year, is 28%. This is the first time that I'm revealing this information in a public discussion. In 5 years, it's 38%. And in 30 years, it's going to be 44%. And of course, this is more sophisticated than I'm saying because we have to ask many times AI to have different sessions, and we have to play around with different temperatures because sometimes you have very weird answers, but at the end, we come up with these measures in terms of occupational exposure. Then you can see in the next slide, you can see a lot of heterogeneity regarding occupations. So you're going to see that there are the usual suspects in terms of top exposed occupations. So you can see there, for instance, telephone operators, telemarketers, but also you can see people who can check loans, credit officers. So because you can replace in some way using AI. But it's very interesting because it's not only the repetitive occupations that can be replaced, also occupations that are related more with cognitive sciences, and we put together here an example of medical doctors. And you can see medical doctors, it has a lot of heterogeneity again. Radiologists have, for instance, the highest exposure because you can have millions of X-rays in your database, and then you come up with a good diagnostic, a good assessment. But on the other hand, it's very difficult to replace pediatricians because it's a very close relationship with your kids. So that's why this is useful in terms that we have to think now about this discussion regarding technology, regarding AI, because we have a lot of discussion regarding climate change, and we talk about stranded assets. So we have to talk about stranded people, and we have to avoid that. And that's why these measures have implications for labor markets, but also have implications for education. So we need to plan ahead regarding that. So we computed in the next slide, and we extrapolate the numbers because this is focused on occupations in the US. But if the distribution is more or less similar in the world, in Latin America, and in Trinidad and Tobago, those are the numbers of exposed occupations. So worldwide is almost 1 billion jobs that are exposed to AI. In the case of Latin America and the Caribbean, 84 million jobs, and in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, 162,000 jobs. It doesn't mean that they are going to be replaced within a year, but it means that there is a likelihood that you can replace those jobs. And that's why sometimes it's going to be useful to AI for some occupations, or at the end of the day can be replaced too. So that's why we have to play with that. So I think the policies to respond to automation risk should consider the heterogeneity of these risks. Education should be adapted to technological changes, and we have to think differently. And we have a discussion at the beginning of this panel to say, okay, we have to have some flexibility to adapt to new occupations. And that's why sometimes in the discussion, we're going to talk about safe havens of occupations that can you move without losing a job. And very important, this discussion regarding AI augmentation versus replacement. So we have to take advantage of the technology and not to be replaced by the technology. I'll leave it there.
Yeah. I think very sobering points and sobering figures. But I mean, I think you ended on a really important point. We need to see how we use AI to augment our labor processes and our productivity rather than the replacement. So I think a lot more work has to go into that. There perhaps will be certain jobs that will be lost that can be easily computerized, etc., for which AI would be useful. But how we build on AI augmentation in our development vision, I think, is going to be also critical. So thanks a lot. So I'm looking at the time now, and maybe I will just entertain a last round of some very quick perspectives on and then I'll open up the floor. This time, perhaps I'll start with you, Petra, and this is a much shorter session, to just tell us quickly, because we talked about development vision, we talked about specific projects that you're thinking about. I want to hear a little bit about the actual instruments you're using, and what are the kinds of things you do in terms of financing this development in Trinidad and Tobago. So quickly, in maybe 2-3 minutes, give us a little bit of your punchline there.
I will be short. So basically, CARTAC or IMF has, like, I would say, 3 basic instruments how we can help to facilitate this work. So first is what I mentioned before, that we do this regional workshop seminar. So basically, we are trying to put all those countries in the region together, all these representatives working on the same area, sitting in the same room, being able to discuss issues which they actually realize that many of them are similar and that they could learn from each other. So that's the first one, and also to involve sometimes the other stakeholders. So basically climatologists, in case of climate issue we mentioned before, but also the others and other partners can be involved. Other central banks which are relevant could be even out of the region, those who can provide some knowledge and who are ahead of those countries in the region. That's the number one. Number 2 is, and that's what also Trinidad and Tobago central banks used in the past. You had peer-to-peer learning to Jamaican central bank. So that's a targeted learning from 1 or sometimes even 2 authorities at the same time, meaning that your team working on certain topic, going to visit other country, the counterpart, trying to learn how they work. It is also beneficial for the country which is receiving this visit, because they could also sometimes, it can help them to realize certain things, to kind of support internal communication, and also learn sometimes from the other country, because it might be that they are ahead on many aspects, but they might be still behind on some other. And then the last one is, of course, and probably the most important in terms of providing technical assistance from the IMF, is direct technical assistance, meaning that IMF goes to certain countries. So I go to Trinidad and Tobago, and I come sometimes with some other experts on my own, and trying to bring certain knowledge and help with implementation, kind of hands-on, and do the work directly in the field. Now, in terms of areas which we are supporting, if we go to the next slide, that's basically other areas where we are providing technical assistance in financial stability. So financial stability report, trying to help with this, to progress. Stress testing, very important for financial stability, to help how to set up the tools, how to design scenario, and so forth. Climate risk assessment I already mentioned before. And the last one, we also started recently to do direct TA on communication, because that's what we see also, it's very important in the region, and we also try to do some technical communication. It's of course not on the same it's not the same magnitude like the other before, but it's some kind of new area we are also trying to have. So these are the main area. Everything else kind of goes around those 4 points.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's very good to see communication has come into this as an important element. Bernardo, maybe I'll skip the order and maybe jump straight to you. I mean, you've mentioned a number of projects you're doing, very active. I mean, tell us a little bit about your instrumentation. What are the mechanisms you're using? What kind of financial instruments are available? Because many times in countries, people are not aware sometimes of some of the instruments that they can access. So what kinds of financial instruments are available to countries in the development space?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Can we go to the, okay, perfect. So we started in 2017 with our first loan, and we've been working along very well because now we have a portfolio of 1.3 billion US dollars. And the thing is that we responded. Every time that the government, every government asks something for CAF, we were there. And sometimes they ask things that we didn't have, so we have to invent. And one, for example, that we are discussing now, I would like to talk about it, is this flexible amortization loan. So the idea is that, this is a country, energy-based country, and sometimes when prices are low, we want to give the possibility to the country to, don't pay the amortization. So we do that. We wait for a while. So there is like a threshold of price that both we know, and if it goes below that price, the country has the possibility of not to pay the amortization. I mean, that's not mandatory. They can do it or not. And that we are considering for the region, not only for gas prices, but also for other types of shocks. It's not easy because we need information. Data is very important. So that's one, and we are actually discussing with the government right now the possibility of signing a loan, the next loan, with this clause included in the loan. We have the Financial Compensatory Fund, which the idea of this fund is to have the rate of interest now is higher, so to lower a little bit with a fund created for this purpose and for special types of project. And well, the money comes, of course, from the utilities of the bank. That's another time. Local currency, a lot of discussions of local currency. It's possible to do it, not everywhere, but some countries in the region. Bahamas is one. I don't want to mention the other ones. Of course, Trinidad and Tobago is another one because of the financial market. So that's another possibility that we have. Fixed interest rates, that's possible to do it. Swapping a loan. Now it's not very interesting because of higher interest rate, but when they were low, we said, do it, fix it, because that's possible. But rates of interest change, so we are going to wait until then, and then we are going to propose to the government to fix the interest rate because that's the best way of dealing with. Hybrid loans, a mix of swap and investment, and the government decides until where is policy based and when is investment. And guarantees. Sometimes governments, they want to issue bonds to raise debt, go to international markets, and warranty helps the governments to have a better interest rates. So that's the kind of proposals that we have for the public sector. The private sector, we also have some financial instruments. I'm not going to go, we have loans, all the alternatives, subordinated, AB loans, senior, syndicated, guarantees, equity investments, lines of credit, financial advice. So we have a lot. We have only one credit for the moment for the private sector, but the idea is to continue growing in the country. And last but not least, and Eric, you talk about it, and you talk about a bank is more than loans. And that's very important. And we are talking here about technical assistance and knowledge, forums, discussions, events, webinars, trainings, courses. And I think that's part of what we as a development bank needs to offer, not only to the ministry of every ministry, but the central bank and the public in general. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So clearly, a wide range and a heterogeneous range of instruments for financing development. Perhaps I'll go to Therese. I know, maybe having seen the CDB, I know the CDB also has a wide range. I didn't want to get you into all of that. I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about some of the lessons from financing development, because CDB has been in this game for a long, long time. Tell us, what are the kinds of lessons, if you have to ramp up this investment in the Caribbean, etc., what have you learned from that lengthy experience? What are the things, we need to do? What's the future of the kind of engagement that you see?
Yeah, thanks, Sheldon. That's a good way to end my intervention this morning. I really think the key ingredient is the dialogue. Picking up on Eric and Bernardo's point, the bank is more than just financing. And I think the CDB's job, given that it is the region's bank, is to really win over the hearts and minds of policymakers, but also citizens of the region, to drive the policy dialogue for change. Eric mentioned something just in passing about democracy and how the way in which we interact with our government, who are members of our institutions, that dialogue tends to focus on a relationship at a point in time. And I think what we need to be doing is going deeper, where the dialogue is extended to civil society, is extended to the beneficiaries of the work that we're doing in the country, so that it's not just seen as associated with a particular administration in time. And I think the Trinidad story, for me, is a good model for maybe how not to do a country strategy, meaning it's typically not aligned with an election cycle. And what happens is, if it doesn't get done in my administration, then I will abandon the project. And we've seen this across the region. Sadly, this is not unusual in the development world, that administrations dump projects that are perfectly fine, but because it doesn't align with their mandate, or they don't see benefit accruing to their administration, they get abandoned. So I think our institutions are littered with these kinds of projects. We need to find a way to fix that. And the way to fix that, in my opinion, is to win over the interests of the beneficiaries. So if it's in education, the education dialogue should be about changing education for all citizens in the country. It's not associated just because I'm in power, I have this view about education, but it's about, are we really moving the needle on changing the kinds of students that are going to be graduating with the skills that are needed, faced with what we just heard on AI, for example. And we know that productivity is an issue, so how is it that we can generate that conversation nationally so that everybody's brought on board? We had that conversation before this session started this morning about how difficult it is to change the mindset of parents around testing, for example, so that our children coming out of school have skills like critical thinking, working with others, digital literacy, and so on, and not just, I've passed 10 CXEs. So I think but that requires a big shift nationally, and everyone needs to buy into that model. So I would say from here on, I think what we need to be doing is deepening the dialogue, deepening the partnerships, because we're all about the same development outcomes in the end: lower poverty, modernization of the economies, financial resilience, climate change resilience, disaster risk management, which are important ingredients for the future. And this point that was made about a climatologist in a central bank, for example, credit rating agencies now are looking at those climate risks to determine who is a AAA and who is not. And one view in these rating agencies is just by being small, being a small country, already would eliminate a AAA rating. So these are issues that are present and we're grappling with, I think, as institutions, but also as governments and finance ministers. It's becoming more and more difficult to compete competitively globally, especially for countries in this region, because of the climate risk. So I think my final word is more dialogue, more policy, more knowledge, more partnerships with everybody, because it doesn't make sense. I'm not competing with IDB, we cannot. I'm not competing with CAF, we cannot. We have to work together to make sure Trinidad and Tobago and this region gets the best results from all these sectors we identified as crucial for our future. Thanks.
Okay, that's a great point, Therese, great point. And perhaps my final question before I open it up to the floor. I want to get back to this productivity issue that you raised. It's, even in Trinidad and Tobago, the central bank perhaps is the only institution here that does any kind of measurement of it, and even that is not accorded, tremendous discussion in the public about what's going on. We talk about wages, we talk about all the other things, but the key driver of development productivity is not something we're looking at on a daily basis, measuring, talking about. So tell us, we know it's critical for sustaining development. What kind of lessons from your experience, Eric? I know you're very skilled in this area. Can you kind of share with us and some of the things we perhaps need to do in Trinidad and Tobago?
No, many thanks, Shelton, for that question, and probably Therese's comments are a good segue to answer it. Because when we mentioned how to save the economy and how to save the democracy, I was thinking that some countries, or probably a majority of countries, not only in Latin America and the Caribbean, but also in the world, it's very difficult to implement reforms, very difficult. And you have long discussion regarding pension reforms, fiscal reforms, educational reforms, and sometimes we know what to do because it's technical stuff, but given the political reasons, we don't find middle ground and we don't find national consensus. And that's why we have to avoid short-termism and think long-term. And that's why when you talk about development and productivity, we have to think long-term, otherwise it's impossible. And I invite you to read an op-ed that I wrote for Project Syndicate, trying to think with a new notion of thinking long-term. And I said, probably we need to create new institutions to think about infrastructure for the long term, avoiding the political cycle. Probably somebody of you can say, you're so naive because you're withdrawing power from politicians. And I say, you know what, there are good examples. And one of them is the central bank. The central bank is long-term. Fiscal rules are long-term. So for structural issues, I think you can try to think like that. Because otherwise, sometimes one government came with a reform and the opposition said, no. Then the opposition came to power and then the new opposition said, no. And we have discussions of pension reforms in many countries for several decades, not years. So they cannot happen. And let me give you just an example of the impact of these reforms on economic growth. And here we have a counterfactual exercise. And the question is, what would have happened if Latin America and the Caribbean have labor, capital, and total factor productivity of Asia since 1960, okay? So the blue line is actual GDP, the blue line here. If you take Asia's capital, Asia's human capital is the green line. So that's the counterfactual exercise. If you take physical capital, is the blue line. So light blue, green, blue line. And the yellow line is if you take total factor productivity of Asia. It would be 4 times in terms of GDP per capita, 4 times. So that's the huge impact if you increase productivity. And of course, some countries are doing really good in terms of education. For instance, Trinidad and Tobago is doing very well in terms of education, primary and secondary, because it has an impact on GDP, but also on returns. But there is a shortage of high-skilled workers in the Caribbean. So you're good, primary, secondary, but not on vocational training or university degree. So we need to invest more. So what are the simple recommendations right now? First, avoid size-dependent policies. Sometimes we are obsessed about small and medium enterprises, and many cases are really inefficient. So you have to assign capital where you need it. Companies that are constrained because of capital in the Caribbean is 81%. In Trinidad and Tobago is 90%. They are constrained because they don't have the capital. Second, formalization. This is an issue for several countries in the region. Remove trade barriers and increase global market access. We have to open up in some way, both in trade and financial flows. Address credit market imperfections. And very important, and we are working on this, and we are going to produce a flagship for next year, strengthen competition. Sometimes, and in many countries, at least in South America, citizens think that markets are taking advantage of them. And it should be the other way around. Citizens have to take advantage of markets. So I think that's the main message regarding competition. With that, I finish. Thank you, Shelton.
Okay, thanks. So let me thank before I open it up, let's thank the panelists for their insightful contributions. I think, I know the debate will continue, and I'd like to open the floor for questions from both our in-house audience and, of course, our online participants. If you're here with us, please, I think there are mics. You can approach the mics and you raise your questions. And for those joining online, I think there is a mechanism through the online platform. So we now open it up for questions. Yes.
Thank you so much. Let me just first say, I'm the Jamaican High Commissioner here in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to the multilateral financial institutions, because I know in Jamaica and across the Caribbean, a lot of what we have achieved is because of your assistance. So let me first say thank you to you all. And I just want to say that the election cycle point that was made is important, I think, because our 5-year cycles don't always match with your cycles when you're developing your plans. What is a solution for that in your minds? And another question relates to the gender data that was shown earlier. And a conclusion was reached, and I wanted to know if there's more data, because the conclusion was reached that there is a direct relation between participation in the workforce and schooling. But we must remember that in Trinidad and Tobago, there are cultural things that must be considered, different races and cultural considerations. So I would love to know if there's more information to make the conclusion, because it's not necessarily so because of culture. And just to share the experience of Jamaica, our Bank of Jamaica, our central bank, was just made independent a few years ago. It wasn't always. And part of what it has done is that it has made jingles, everyday jingles that people can relate to, the common man on the street. And it goes to the idea of buying that several of you mentioned, and communication and the different types of communication. So that's an idea, I think, that really works. Now, since March, April this year, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holness, he has been speaking about productivity. So it's interesting to hear. And one of the statements he made in April, he said that productivity is partially driven by motivation, fueled by compensation. And our Minister of Finance, Nigel Clark, who is moving to the IMF, sadly, he has done a compensation review across Jamaica, something that has never been done in our history. And so that part is there. How do we get motivation? Because if it's compensation and motivation, which leads to the productivity that we spoke about, what are some of your ideas to deal with the motivation side of things? Thank you.
So that's sweet. Thank you very much. It's great to see the Jamaican High Commission. I think I will entertain a few others and then post them. I recognize former Minister Hunt.
Thank you very much. And again, thanks very much to the Central Bank. Congratulations on 60 years. And congratulations for pulling this together. Fantastic group and fantastic moderating by yourself, sir. You give me the title of former minister, I will accept that, yes. But at this point in time, I probably will take the one that former executive director to the IDB and the region for the last 2 years.
Yes.
Thanks again, Eric. You know, we'd had a lot of conversations, long conversations at the IDB, and you know, you were one of the people that introduced me to the St. Augustine syndrome, which I always said was one of the most revealing things about economics in the region, and the whole idea kicking the can down the road. Now, you come from a country, from Chile, and you talked about long-term planning, which I recognize is very critical. And the whole idea of setting up new long-term institutions, independent institutions. Chile has had a lot of experience in that. And to what extent have you seen in your research a correlation between success or growth for countries in the region and those who have taken that path of setting up these long-term institutions that will manage the level of debt that the country has, manage the income, manage the budget projections? Have we seen a positive correlation in that regard to encourage people to go into that, along that particular line? One of the things that I observe in my time, you know, the region needs a lot of funding. And they do get a lot of assistance. I just looked at the technical assistance from CAF, and I saw 14 million. Another time I did it for the IDB over the period, and at that time, the amount of money over a 4-year period given to Trinidad and Tobago was over $25 million in technical assistance, so 14, 25 in one case. So money, yes, I'm sure we also have a lot of loans in our books that are approved. What has been our rate of disbursement of those facilities, and what is your comments about the building the execution capabilities in the region? That is one thing that I've seen, I've had a little bit of problem with, and how do we go about building that execution capabilities? On the whole idea of productivity, yes, I understand that the region, and by extension Trinidad, productivity levels are not what it's supposed to be. But I also know that our inequality, Gini coefficients for the region, for the whole world, this region as a whole is not working, or is not as optimal as it should be. So to what extent do we have an issue there between the fact that we're not productive because we are not firing on all cylinders? And there's a big part of the economy, a big part of the people who are actually not performing or being left out of the whole productive cycle. At the IDB, we recognize those to be women and people of African descent. In those cases, 66% of the people in the region fall into those two categories, women or African descent people. And therefore, we need to start to what extent are the groups, are you all focusing on lending money to the areas that are not producing, right? Those two particular areas, so that we could raise their productivity levels and by extension, improve the Gini coefficient and improve the productivity of the region. So again, I put that out there for all. And finally, you know, I heard, I'm sure there's a lot of recommendations coming. I was at that digital conference, the IDB held one a year before, when we talked about small island digital states. Fantastic conversations in the region. But again, to what are we doing in development banks in helping the execution capabilities of the whole region? Because I'm sure if we go back and measure what has come out of that conference, other than a very good conference, right? And I think we have had that conversation a lot, and we need to improve that capacity in the region. Private sector, a lot of what we talked about needs money for debt. Eric, I know you have a lot of views on the levels of debt that we are having as a country. So as we borrow, we are continue to raise that debt. Clearly, we need to get more funding, and we need to get the private sector, and we talk about the international private sector, coming into our environment and participating and reducing the level of debt. What are we working, or what are the different multilateral institutions doing in encouraging the enabling environment for the private sector to come to the region, so that we will not end up in a situation whereby we are carrying a lot of debt and we are being able to share that debt burden with the private sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have two more. Could you state your name at the mic, and we'll take the rounds of questions and then give the panelists.
Yes, hi. Ryan Hamilton Davis, Trinidad Newsday. Well, I have a few questions, so and I don't know how much time we have, so I'm going to ask the hard ones.
We're really
first,
running
right?
out of time.
So,
we
yeah,
can,
I just want to talk a little bit about the oil and gas sector first and foremost. In Trinidad and Tobago, that's what runs the economy in a large part. All right, so it would be hard to talk about climate change and hard to talk about all these other policies without actually finding out about the state of the oil and gas sector and how it interacts with the people. All right, but I want to find out from the financial institutions on the panel, how do you all interact in particular with the oil and gas sector? What's that relationship like? That's the first question. And given the drive to achieve these SDGs, you know, Trinidad and Tobago is part of it. We are co-signed in many initiatives. Given the drive to achieve these SDGs in carbon reductions, how do these financial institutions balance that support for, if there is any support for the oil and gas sector, and to that drive for clean transition? That's
okay. Thanks very much. Very, very interesting question.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Scott Hansen from the U.S. Embassy. I want to thank the organizers of this conference. It's been an incredible discussion. I love the total factor of productivity. It's like the everything else variable in the solo growth model, or if you're, you know, and necessarily I think part of that then either directly or indirectly is security. Or from the inclusive growth diagnostic perspective, security and the associated micro risks are clearly one of the most binding constraints on inclusive economic growth here in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm sure all of you, like us, deal with a lot of rules about preventing development assistance money from going into security assistance. But I think it's really important, if we want to have any kind of sustainable impact on inclusive growth here, that our development assistance programs either have secondary effects that improve the security situation or can somehow act as force multipliers for security assistance programs that are being conducted by others. So just wondering, if I haven't heard anybody mention security yet this morning, and wondering how you all are thinking about that as you plan your development programs. Thank you.
Okay. And perhaps I can just ask for any question from online, so I can, you know, do we have any question from online? Yeah. Any online questions?
Good morning, Dr. Nichols. No, we've had a lot of engaging discussion, but generally comments, no questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I am going to just turn it over in sequence. So we've had an important question on the election cycle that has come up more than once, you know, and so I'll just open it. I know this was raised by you, Therese. You know, what's the solution?
Yeah, I think all MDBs are struggling with this question. I think Eric made an important point about long-term planning and having a long-term perspective, but that's a mindset change. And I like the ambassador's point about the independence of the BOJ in Jamaica, because what we've seen, and not just the BOJ, and the fact that Jamaica now has fiscal rules. So the Fiscal Sustainability Act and the legislation in Jamaica has really anchored the whole, you know, policies around how much the government's going to spend, when it's going to spend it, what's going to spend it on, and the accountability mechanism for that, which is reporting to the public. And so everyone is aware of what's going on the macro fiscal point. I think it's really important. I think that's a really good example of how you can embed behavioral change in the overall policy environment so that everybody in the country realizes the Bank of Jamaica is not bending to the Minister of Finance to do anything to reduce interest rates when it's not prudent. or tinker with the exchange rate when it's not prudent. So having the inflation targeting mechanism in Jamaica, I think, has really, really helped change the orientation and the private sector behavior behind that. Because, and I can talk about this for days because I worked on Jamaica a long time, lived there for 10 years. So you see that there are dividends that the country is able to reap as a result of that stability. So we need to find, and in Jamaica too, there's a lot of debate around, should we have similar kinds of mechanisms for crime and security, for example? And we didn't discuss that because I think in all of our agencies, maybe excluding the IDB, the resources for working on citizen security and crime prevention is very small. IDB has a big portfolio there. But I think the point about security cannot be overlooked in the productivity question, but I'll leave that to others. I want to turn to the point about the election cycle, the election cycle I just mentioned, but also the issue around implementation capacity and what are our agencies doing across the region. So at CDB, we just launched a big research project on this year, trying to identify what are the bottlenecks. We know some of them. We don't have enough engineers in this region to cope with all of the infrastructure projects that are going on. So an infrastructure project typically alone, whether it's IDB, CDB, CAF, or others, is contracted for 5 years. No project gets done in 5 years in this region. It takes on average 8 to 10. To build a road, to build a school, to build anything, it just takes that amount of time. Part of it is local capacity on the ground, not enough engineers, not enough project managers. It's a big issue. Other issue, within the 8 public agencies that have to deal with all of our agencies, there is very limited capacity. Unlike Jamaica, which has an excellent planning institute, which is the interlocutor between the government, all the government agencies, and all of our different bodies, PIOJ I'm talking about, it's a centralized decision-making point. So you can get the answer you need from the government fairly quickly, although even in the case of Jamaica, you don't get the answers that quickly, but at least you have one point to go to, and that's their job to deal with agencies. In smaller countries, it's the same people dealing with CAF, dealing with IDB, dealing with CDB, dealing with their day-to-day work. And so it becomes not just an onerous sort of stack of decisions that have to be made by very few people, let's face it, very few people. In some ministries, it's one person. And so that's a real issue. Are there ways around this? Absolutely. Technology is one. We have to figure out ways in which our clients can interact with us through technology, through dedicated portals, for example, to deal with all the issues we need to be dealing with. Now, are our agencies the easiest in the world to work with? No. We're all very bureaucratic. We all take long to make decisions as well. And we need to work on streamlining that interface with our clients to make the job of the persons who have to make the decisions in the countries easier. So that's part of what we need to do, Shelton, to close this implementation gap and make sure that those loans that get committed, and by the way, Ministry of Finance are paying commitment fees on those undisbursed balances. The question was raised, how much are disbursed and how much are not disbursed. I think on average for CDB, we're talking about maybe 35% at any point in time of the loans that committed are already dispersed. So it means we have a long way to go to complete the projects. There's a lot of work to be done here. We're open to ideas. I think technology is part of the solution, but I'm also curious to hear what others may be doing in this direction. Thanks.
I want to point a couple of those issues on productivity to Eric, because we've had some very interesting issues. One, of course, raised by our esteemed Jamaican High Commissioner, the question of motivation versus compensation. The compensation part, maybe in some countries is an issue, but motivation, how do we get that issue of motivation in? That distinction between productivity and inequality, we talk about productivity, the other side of the coin that is really impacting that is inequality. How are we balancing these? Are we doing enough on the side of inequality to to raise overall productivity levels. So I'd like to get perspectives, and maybe Bernardo, I know, others can jump in on this, but very, very interesting perspectives. Yeah?
No, this is very important, and by the way, all the questions really pretty good. So thank you very much for those. Regarding compensation and motivation, probably I can use the example of education in some particular regions or some countries where, for instance, you have flexibility in terms of majors and minors, trying to find your real motivation in terms of a specific occupation. In some other countries, like in my country, in Chile, if you are in high school, you apply to university, you apply to be a lawyer, you apply to be an engineer, and that's it. And you cannot say, you know what, I don't want to do this in 1 year or 2 years. So I think you need some flexibility to say, okay, I would like to do whatever I would like to do, and that's the motivation part. So in terms of the educational impact, I think is very important. Also, Robert mentioned this San Agustin syndrome that probably many people don't know, but the story is very simple. San Agustin, before being a saint, he liked to enjoy life. So he committed all type of sins. But one day he said, okay, I have to change. I have to convert to God. And he knelt and he said, okay, God, give me chastity and continence, but not yet. And this is the story of our countries. We know what to do. We know what type of reforms want to implement, but we say, you know what, let's leave it for the next government. And that's the problem. And that's why the Jamaica High Commissioner, she has a very good point in terms of how to think and avoiding these short political cycles of 5 years or even 4 years in some cases. And we have to have discussion with the state, not with the government. So we have to think long term. And I think that's very important to try to come up with reforms that could be implemented. And related to that, good examples of long-term institutions. You can look at Chile, you can look at other places, but look at Trinidad and Tobago with the Heritage Fund. It's a very nice and good institution. There is a recent paper published a couple of months ago that they put a counterfactual exercise. What would happen if Trinidad and Tobago didn't have the Heritage Fund? And the impact is significant in terms of growth. So I think you have a very good example on that, and probably you have to be proud of that. And by the way, the Heritage Fund is the largest sovereign wealth fund in Latin America as a percentage of GDP. So keep in mind of that.
Okay.
I have so many answers, but probably I can answer.
There are some other issues that I really want to hear ventilated. I'll come back to the gender participation issue, but we had an interesting question being raised about, the interaction of our institutions with the oil and gas sector by Mr. Hamilton. Climate change is on us. How do we balance that support? I mean, clearly it's a case we can't shut down the oil and gas sector. How do we balance that kind of support? And maybe Bernardo, I'll throw that one at you. I know it's a difficult one, but
the toughest one for me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would say at the start, though, one has to plan for the transition. It's happening. So the pace at which you move that transition in, as you are building out your renewable sectors and other sectors, you have to manage that pace with how you gradually get out of the oil and gas sector, so you don't have the huge disruption effects, right?
Right.
You can try to do it as a smooth transition. So how you design a smooth transition for that, is something, and is that something you all are thinking about in your institutions?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for, before getting there, I like this San Agustin, idea, but eventually San Agustin became saint. So there is hope. I'm going to talk about CAF and, our policy towards gas and oil. well, not oil, only gas. And we consider actually in CAF working with the private sector, with the public sector, with the gas, because exactly that, you know, before jumping to the next tree, you have to be sure that you can jump. You need the strength to jump to the next one. So I think you have to take advantage of what you have. Of course, project has to be, you know, they have to be clean enough and, you know, comply with local regulations. But in the case of CAF, we are willing to finance, you know, good project of gas, and we are doing that in the region. So maybe we can discuss later about that. But yes, we see that, you know, forgetting about gas and considering only renewable energies is a strategy, but I think it's a good strategy of taking advantage of what you have and then jump to the next stage.
We have a few
regarding Roberto's, yeah, the question on the event, because I was thinking on that, you know, what do we get from that? And yeah, very nice discussions and everything, but those changes doesn't happen in 1 week, 1 year, or 5 years. You know, it takes a while. And one thing that you need is political will. And this type of events, you know, people, they hear this and they, you know, they go home, they sleep with that, and then you change the mind of people. But unfortunately, it's not going to take, you know, it's not going to be fast. But it's part of the discussion, and, you know, you have to go with the trend. Yeah.
Petra, I know you will have some of your own views on climate risk and other things, independent institutions.
No, maybe I can, because we don't have much time, so maybe I can just make a quick point. On the productivity, actually, when you were discussing on this precondition, I think what is also important and what I see here in the region, that we have educational system here in place, which is providing us all skills which we need in the region, right? Because if certain type of education is not available and I need to go to the US or somewhere first, it's already restricting the group which can go there. Yeah. And second, even if they go there, I would say only few of them will come back, right? Yeah. So you are by default missing the skills which you need. And that's, I think, big limitation. So what we can do here, we can provide educational programs which would cover all skills which are needed in the region. So there should not be significant gaps. Yeah. And that's what can help.
Right. I know there are many issues, but I wanted to also get back on the gender issue. Very important question on that, you know, that correlation between participation and schooling, you know, and for gender, I'm very concerned about men. You know, we've done a lot of work on the women, building capacity. What are we doing about our boys, you know? And those are the kinds of things that I think are really critical, you know? So I'd like to get some perspectives, you know, and this is perhaps the final response. We can, after this, you know, continue the discussion in the corridors. So, Bernardo and Shotheris, perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, regarding the graph that I showed, you know, the thing is that there are many ways to explain, you know, what's going on in the labor market for women. But I think the idea of that graph, with the information that we had, unfortunately, you know, from 2000 to 2011, is that women in rural areas, when they don't go enough to school, they tend to participate less in the labor market. That was the main idea. But of course, there are other explanations. Cultural behavior is very important, and there are other questions to consider. For example, the participation of women in general in executive places. I mean, when you see a picture of the executive level, even in the banks, it's like a picture of the 70s. And yeah, I mean, it hasn't changed a lot. I mean, and that's. I mean, there are many explanations, and besides that, maybe we can discuss that with later.
And I'll give maybe Therese if she wants to have the last word on this, but I think we are out of time. I've seen my cues coming from the...
No, I agree on the boys issue. It's it's top of mind. I think we talked earlier about education. Schooling today is not when we were in school. So our children are distracted by lots of other things, and we need to find ways to deliver that curriculum or a new curriculum in different ways to keep boys engaged. We know that boys are dropping out at 5th grade level in Jamaica, and that number we're starting to see across the region. That's not a good harbinger of the future. So we need to find ways to combine what the curricula should be. It needs to be modernized, it needs to include technology, it needs to be designed to keep that boy's brain engaged in school differently, because girls and boys learn differently, we know that. So I think this is a big issue for the region, but not to diminish the fact that we still haven't hit where we want to be on gender equality in this region, right? Look at this panel. Does this look equal? Just an example. This looks like what our boardroom looks like in the Caribbean, and that has to change. And we're working on that at CDB. It's as a cross-cutting theme. It's on all of our development effectiveness tables. We look at that, what's happening with women on these projects. But I think with that, it's like education. It's long-term, it's changing mindsets, and we're going to get there. Thank you.
Okay, and Eric just wants to come in and we end, I'm giving him
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. My business is research. So we did a research where we hired actors and actresses to get loans in Chile. And we found out that there is discrimination against women. If we extrapolate the difference, same risk, there were clones in terms of economics, in terms of salaries, in terms of jobs, and so on. But they were discriminated in terms of access. If you extrapolate how much they lost in credit, it was $12 billion. Wow. So imagine that, assuming the same risk. So they are not behaving well, but at the same time they're losing money. So this is a message for gender disparities. And if this is happening in Chile, probably it's happening everywhere.
Okay, so let me bring this panel to a close and really thank our esteemed panelists. Stimulating discussions. We'll continue, I'm sure, to debate with them in the corridors, but it's a pleasure to have such a distinguished group with us. So please show your appreciation. And I hand over now to Dr. Finch.
All right, thanks. I think we could do better now. We could give the panel a round of applause. So, as we conclude this morning's session, we have to say a heartfelt thanks to those that joined us in person and those that joined us online. We know that time is indeed precious, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share this moment with us. We want to thank some of the teams that work behind the scenes to make today a reality. External relations, support services, IT, and of course, my research secretariat team. Thank you. To the moderator and panelists, many thanks for taking the time from your busy schedules, in many cases, taking a few flights to be here with us today. To our audience, both in person and virtually, thank you again for your engagement and enthusiasm. So, but before we close,